I heard yelling near the fence. My heart jumped. I rushed outside and saw two men in cheap-looking uniforms trying to force my 16-year-old son, Mason, into a golf cart with flashing red lights. They yelled something about him trespassing, but I knew for a fact that he was on our own land, feeding the chickens and checking our fences just like he does every morning. I sprinted toward them, rage burning in my chest. "Let go of my son," I shouted, half expecting them to back off. But the taller guy, who had a big belly and wore mirrored sunglasses, didn't even blink. "He's trespassing," the man barked. "Lakewood Estates has the right to detain violators." I stared at him in disbelief. "My farm isn't part of any HOA. I told them to let Mason go and get off my property, but they insisted this whole area now belonged to the HOA. The other guy, who looked nervous and kept checking behind him, said Karen ordered them to patrol the border. I could see Mason struggling against their grip. He was furious, but he also knew better than to make a move without proof. Turns out he'd already started recording on his phone, capturing every second of this insanity. I clenched my fists and glared at the men. "You touch him again, and I'll have you arrested for assault." My voice was shaky with anger, but I meant every word. Finally, they released Mason. One of them muttered about calling the HOA president Karen before speeding off in that stupid golf cart. Mason handed me his phone, screen still recording. He was breathing hard, trying to shake it off. "I'm okay," he said. "They tried to rip my phone out of my hand, but I got everything. Drop your city below. We want to see how far this story has reached." I nodded, my mind already racing. I'd heard rumors about Karen's heavy-handed tactics, successive fines, endless rules, and sneaky attempts to expand the HOA's power. But now, it was personal. They'd crossed onto our property, threatened my son, and pretended to have police authority. I felt my stomach tighten, a storm of anger and worry swirling inside. I figured Karen would show up next, probably with a clipboard full of nonsense rules. This was just the start of her war against me and my family. But I wasn't about to roll over. I decided right then and there, if Karen and her plastic badges wanted a fight, I'd make sure they regretted stepping foot on my farm. I didn't care what boundaries she invented on paper. This land has been mine for years. I've got the deeds, the surveys, and now, the video. One thing was for sure. Karen had just declared the wrong war. I didn't have to wait long for Karen to make her grand entrance. Less than 2 hours after those fake security guards left, I spotted her white SUV rumbling up my gravel driveway. Even from the porch, I could see her face twisted in irritation. Rain spattered on her windshield, and wipers flung water in every direction, like the car itself was bracing for a fight. I stood on the porch steps, arms crossed, Mason at my side. A part of me wanted to be calm, logical, show that I wasn't about to be bullied. But anger still pulsed under my skin, thinking about how those men had tried to drag my son off in a golf cart. A golf cart, of all things. Karen stepped out of her SUV with a fancy umbrella and slammed the car door harder than needed. She wore a tailored blazer, as if expecting to hold some kind of official meeting. The way she carried herself screamed, "Power trip!" Sure enough, a thick binder rested against her hip, stuffed with papers and bright sticky notes. She strutted right up to the porch without waiting for an invitation. "Wyatt," she said in a clipped voice, "we need to discuss your family's repeated violations of Lakewood Estates guidelines." I forced a short laugh. "Ma'am, we're not part of Lakewood Estates. This is my own farm, and it's been in my family for decades." "That's not what our newly amended HOA map says," Karen snapped back. She flipped open her binder, pulled out a color-coded document, and tapped the edge like she was presenting a contract to a clueless client. "The board voted unanimously to annex the outer perimeter of your land into Lakewood Estates. According to our new rules, your property is now within our jurisdiction." I stared at her, half certain this had to be some twisted joke. Mason's fists clenched at his sides, but he said nothing, letting me do the talking. "You can't just annex private property with a vote," I shot back. "That's not how county lines or ownership works." Karen's lip curled. "We've had our lawyer confirm this. If you have any issues, you can bring them up at the next HOA meeting. But until then, you must comply." She flipped to another page, brandishing it so aggressively that a few drops of rain splattered onto the ink. "That shed in your yard? It's a violation of community aesthetic standards. Your chickens? We have a noise ordinance. You also owe $250 for trespassing, since your son was seen wandering on Lakewood property this morning." Mason opened his mouth, but I laid a hand on his arm. The last thing I needed was for Karen to start some shouting match that she'd twist into a legal drama. I leaned forward, lowering my voice. 1. We have video of your hired goons manhandling my kid on our private land. 2. He was feeding our chickens, which live on our property, not yours. 3. If you don't leave right now, I'll call the sheriff. "You do that," Karen said, unflinching, eyes narrowed. "But I'd advise you to think carefully about how you approach this. My association has resources. We can make life very difficult for you: late fees, liens, and possible eviction from the community. This is your final warning." Eviction from a community we don't belong to? I couldn't help it. I laughed out loud at the absurdity. Mason held back a smirk, though he was still visibly angry. "You realize that's complete nonsense, right?" Karen raised an eyebrow, as though speaking to a dim-witted child. "We'll see. I suggest you attend tomorrow's HOA hearing at our clubhouse. If you fail to show, the board will proceed with disciplinary measures in your absence." Without another word, she turned on her heel, umbrella snapping in the wind. She marched back to her SUV, binder clutched tight. A moment later, the vehicle roared away, fishtailing slightly in the mud before disappearing down the road toward the uniform rows of Lakewood estates. I exhaled, trying to process what had just happened. Mason turned to me, fury in his eyes. "Dad, they grabbed me like I was a criminal. We can't just let this go." I nodded. "We won't. Trust me." I motioned for him to follow me into the house, where a wave of relief washed over me just being in the warm, familiar kitchen. But that relief was short-lived. My mind spun like a broken record, replaying Karen's threats, annexation, fines, fake eviction notices. It was insane, yet somehow she believed she had the authority to do it all. "First things first," I muttered, grabbing my phone. "We're calling the sheriff." I knew the local sheriff, Sheriff Reynolds, from the few times we'd run into each other around town. He seemed honest, level-headed. If anyone could clear up a bogus land grab, it'd be him. Mason and I sat at the table, the scent of fresh coffee mingling with the leftover panic in the air, and dialed the station. Sheriff Reynolds was out on a call, so we left a message and asked for a call back. I also shot off a quick text, letting him know it was urgent. Then I made a second call, this one to a lawyer I'd hired years ago for some boundary dispute with a neighboring farmer. His name was Sam Pierce, and while I wasn't sure he specialized in HOA law, it was better than nothing. Sam answered on the second ring. After I explained what happened, he let out a whistle. "That's a new one," he said, sounding both amused and disgusted. "HOAs can't just redraw property lines. That's a county-level process. They can't forcibly annex you unless it's some kind of city jurisdiction thing, which it's not. Send me all the documents you have, and if they serve you any official notices, forward those too." I thanked him, feeling a bit of tension slip from my shoulders. I wasn't alone in thinking this was all bogus. We hung up, and Mason let out a long breath. "You really think Karen believes she can do this? It's so outrageous." "She believes it," I said bitterly. "HOAs sometimes act like mini-governments, but they usually stick to controlling what color your house is or how long your grass can be. Karen's trying to play dictator." Mason frowned. "Those guys that grabbed me, what if they come back?" I set a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "We'll be ready. Keep your phone handy. If they try anything else, film it, and if it gets out of hand, we'll call the sheriff immediately." I'll never forget the feeling I got when Mason and I showed up at Lakewood Estates' clubhouse the next morning. It felt like walking into the lion's den. The sky was still gray from the night storm, and puddles covered the neatly trimmed lawns that surrounded the massive, over-decorated building. The second we stepped inside, it was clear Karen had turned this so-called HOA hearing into a full-blown production. Rows of folding chairs faced a long table where Karen and 4 other board members sat, each with piles of paperwork in front of them. And behind them, like some proud, twisted banner, hung a giant Lakewood Estates logo, printed on glossy material and lit by a cheap spotlight. All around, people whispered and stared at me and Mason like we were on trial for some serious crime. My stomach churned, but I kept my face steady. Mason held his phone in his hand, ready to record if things got messy. I spotted a few neighbors who recognized us, looking uncomfortable. Some offered weak smiles, but nobody dared speak up. Karen tapped a gavel against the table the moment she saw us. She loved that gavel. She tapped it again and again, demanding silence from the murmuring crowd. We'll now call to order the disciplinary hearing regarding Wyatt Carter's continued violations of the Lakewood Estates Charter, she announced, voice cool and sharp. I almost laughed at the word charter. Instead, I held up a folder of my own papers, courtesy of my lawyer Sam, who had helped me gather county records, property surveys, and a few other documents I'd managed to pull together on short notice. I stood front and center, ignoring the stares. Before you do anything, I said, I want to make it clear. I'm not part of your O. This farm is outside your boundaries, and I have the official records to prove it. Karen's smile was as thin as ice. That's where you're wrong, she snapped, flipping open her own binder with a flourish. As of last month, the HOA board approved a boundary expansion. Your land is now under our jurisdiction, and you owe us back fees, as well as fines for multiple violations, trespassing, noise complaints, and unsanctioned structures. She rattled off the fines like she was reading numbers from a menu. The total was over $3,000. A few people in the audience gasped. I let her finish, then calmly took a step forward. Here's the survey from the county, I said, lifting the first page so everyone could see it. My voice was surprisingly steady, despite the anger boiling beneath the surface. This says my farm is in an unincorporated zone, not within city limits, and definitely not within any HOA boundaries. One of the board members, a tall, thin man with a comb-over, shifted uncomfortably. He flipped through a stack of papers, looking less certain than Karen did. Karen glared at me. We have our own survey, she said, flipping to a glossy map with bright-colored lines. Our vote is valid. You and your son have refused to comply, and now we're prepared to enforce our bylaws. If you refuse to remove your livestock, pay your fines, or tear down that ugly shed, we'll be forced to file a lien on your property and evict you. Mason huffed, anger flashing in his eyes. Evict us from our own land? He echoed, his voice carrying. You can't do that. We're not in this HOA. Karen banged the gavel again, face flushed. Watch your tone, young man. The board has the authority. She never finished her sentence, because that's when the doors swung open. Sheriff Carter Reynolds strolled in, hat in hand. His presence hushed the crowd instantly. 2 uniformed deputies followed, scanning the room with serious expressions. My heart lifted a little. Maybe we'd finally get some real justice here. Hope I'm not interrupting, the sheriff said, voice echoing. He came to stand beside me and Mason, nodding politely at the board. Got a call about an unauthorized detention on Mr. Carter's property yesterday. Figured I'd drop by to see if that's what this meeting is about. Karen's face went pale. Sheriff, we have everything under control, she said, mustering a tight smile. This is a private HOA hearing regarding Wyatt Carter's violations. We have the right to hold it. The sheriff shrugged. That's fine, ma'am, but I've got some questions first. He held up a piece of paper. We received an incident report claiming that 2 men, acting on behalf of the HOA, forcibly tried to detain Mr. Carter's 16-year-old son on private property. I'd like to know how that squares with your jurisdiction. The audience shifted uneasily in their chairs. I could practically see Karen's mind racing, trying to spin a story that wouldn't land her in trouble. We have security personnel, she said finally, choosing every word with care. They were simply responding to a trespass alert near the newly recognized boundary. I shook my head. That newly recognized boundary is a piece of paper you made up. My deed says different. My county survey says different. You can't just grab my son and claim it's legal. Karen opened her mouth again, but the sheriff held up a hand. Ma'am, if I find that anyone impersonated law enforcement or committed assault and kidnapping against a minor, we're dealing with serious charges. He fixed her with a stern look. This is real business, not an HOA squabble. The tall board member with the comb-over stood up so fast he nearly knocked over his chair. Maybe we should pause the hearing, he blurted, looking at Karen. He was sweating. "We can recheck the boundaries with the county. Maybe reconsider some of these fines." Karen wheeled on him, face twisted in anger. But the rest of the board members murmured in agreement, clearly spooked by the sheriff's warning. Their confidence was unraveling right in front of me. Sheriff Reynolds gave a curt nod. "That's probably a good idea," he said, then turned to me. "Wyatt, if you'd like to press charges regarding yesterday's incident, you let me know. We'll conduct a full investigation." The crowd began chattering as confusion rippled through the room. Karen slammed her binder shut. "Fine," she snapped, glaring at me. "We'll pause the hearing. But don't think this is over, Wyatt. I still have legal grounds to claim your property for Lakewood Estates." I held her gaze, refusing to flinch. "We'll see, Karen." The sheriff watched her carefully, then looked at Mason and me. "Gentlemen, why don't we step outside and talk? Let these folks figure out their next move." We followed him out, ignoring the hush that fell over the audience as we left. Once in the parking lot, I let out a shaky breath. Mason's shoulders sagged, some tension finally easing. The sheriff placed a friendly hand on my arm. "I don't know what Karen's up to, but she's way out of line if she thinks she can redraw property lines by herself. I'll make sure this is looked into properly." "Thank you, Sheriff," I said, truly grateful. "They threatened fines, liens, and who knows what else." He nodded. "Do yourself a favor. Keep records of everything. Photos, videos, statements. If she tries anything more, you give me a call. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to speak with a couple of her security guards." He tipped his hat and headed back inside. Mason and I crossed to our truck, the crisp morning air finally feeling like we could breathe again. But there was no sense of real victory yet. Karen's parting words rang in my ears. "Don't think this is over." A few days after that chaotic meeting at the HOA clubhouse, I thought maybe Karen would slow down. Sheriff Reynolds had made it crystal clear that her antics were under investigation. But Karen wasn't backing off. If anything, she was doubling down. It started with small stuff. One morning, I found a bright orange violation notice stuck on my barn door. It accused me of illegal livestock, calling my chickens unsanctioned poultry. Later that day, Mason and I noticed fresh tire tracks in the mud, right along our fence line. It looked like someone had driven a golf cart on our property at night, maybe scoping out the place. Then we got a letter in the Myla thick envelope marked urgent. When I opened it, I found pages of legal language, all from Karen's new lawyer. According to the letter, our property was now subject to emergency enforcement. If I didn't remove the chickens, tear down my old tool shed, and pay thousands in fines, Karen claimed the HOA had the power to seize my land. It was outrageous. None of it was real law, just big, fancy words meant to scare me. But I wasn't about to scare so easily. I called my lawyer, Sam Pierce, again and read him every line. He just chuckled darkly. "This is pure intimidation," Sam said. "They're bluffing." That same day, Mason heard a buzzing outside and ran to the porch, phone in hand. I followed him out and spotted a small drone hovering over our yard. It made a whining noise, zipping around like a mechanical mosquito. With a jolt, I realized Karen must have been spying on us, trying to gather evidence for more fake violations. I made sure Mason was safe, then reached for my hunting rifle. I'd never fired a shot at a drone in my life, but I was fed up. As soon as that little gadget dipped lower, I aimed just above it, sending a warning shot into the sky. The drone veered wildly away and vanished behind the tree line, like a startled hornet. I knew Karen would raise a fuss about it, but so be it. I wasn't going to let her play spy games over my land. Sure enough, 2 days later, I saw that same unmarked black sedan roll up my driveway. Out stepped a slim man in a crisp suit, the same lawyer who'd threatened me in writing. He brushed dust off his lapel and held out another envelope. "Mr. Carter," he said tersely, "I'm here to serve you with an official notice of property violation. Destroying an HOA surveillance device is a punishable offense. We'll be pursuing damages." "Surveillance device?" I barked back, barely containing my anger. "You mean that drone? I fired a warning shot because it was trespassing over my land, and I've got no HOA contract, so you can keep your threats." His eyes narrowed. "We'll let a judge decide." That was my cue to turn around and walk away. I told him to leave my property unless he had a warrant. He left, but not before tossing the envelope at my feet. I was in no mood for games, so I called Sheriff Reynolds once again. Turned out, he'd heard from the FAA that drone wasn't registered for audio or video surveillance. It was an illegal operation. That put Karen in deep trouble, well beyond the local level. She was messing with federal law now. Still, the tension only ramped up. A week later, the biggest blow came when I drove home late from picking up supplies in town. Mason texted me in a panic. A tow truck was outside, hooking up my pickup, claiming I had unauthorized overnight street parking. Except my truck was parked in my own gravel driveway, nowhere near the street. By the time I got there, Mason had already tried to stop the driver. The man shrugged helplessly. I got an order from Miss Karen Wright. She said this truck is under HOA violation and needs to be towed. I'm just following instructions. I forced myself to stay calm. Look around you. Do you see a city street? I jabbed a finger at the wide space of my farm. This is private property. That order's worthless. He hesitated, but he'd already hitched my truck to the tow rig. I called the sheriff on the spot, letting him hear the tow driver claim it was an HOA order. The sheriff told him to unhitch my truck immediately or face charges of attempted theft. The driver cursed under his breath, unhooked it, and rattled off back toward Lakewood Estates. I stood there under the yellow glow of my porch light, fury pulsing in my veins. Mason's hands shook a little. He was trying to be brave, but I could tell this was wearing on him. I put a hand on his shoulder. We're almost done with this, I promised. Right then, I knew we had no choice but to go all in. Sam helped file a lawsuit the very next morning against Karen Wright and the Lakewood Estates HOA. We alleged harassment, attempted extortion, trespassing, illegal surveillance, and more. Sam even hinted at possible kidnapping charges for the men who tried to drag Mason away that first day. Within days, everything flipped. Board members started quitting, publicly announcing they had no idea Karen was acting so recklessly. One or two apologized directly to me, admitting they'd never meant to bother our farm. The HOA's newsletter stopped printing. Karen went silent in the neighborhood chat groups. It was like watching a castle crumble, stone by stone. But Karen still had a bit of fight left. She hired a new lawyer and tried to sue me back for emotional distress, calling me a danger to the neighborhood. We had to attend a hearing in county court, but once the judge heard our side and saw all the evidence of Karen's stunt, she threw her lawsuit out within minutes. He even warned Karen that more frivolous filings could cost her thousands in fines. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to hit that like button, subscribe for more, and share your thoughts in the comments below.